Yeah, Grace Point. We're glad you're here with us today. You want to stand with us? Sing with us.
You're the soul who understands the scars that made me who I am. Through the drifting sands of time, I got your back and you got mine. If you bear a heavy load,
here we go.
'Cause you carried me with you from the highest of the peaks to the darkness of the blue. I was just too blind to see. Like a lighthouse in a storm, you were always guiding me. Yeah, it's true. You carried me with you from the day it all began. Took my hand when I hurt a bit too deep. You watched me as I fell asleep, and when my head was in the clouds, you found a way to pull me out. You picked my heart up off the ground and showed me love was all around. Darkness of the blue, I was just too blind to see. Like a lighthouse in a storm, you were always guiding me. Yeah, it's true. You carried me with you. Oh, we'll be sitting on the world together, watching as the days turn into night. We're never giving up without a fight. If you should ever bear a heavy load, I'll be the wheels, I'll be the road. I'll see us through the thick and thin, for love and loss until the end. Yeah, you carried me with you from the highest of the peaks to the darkness of the blue. I was just too blind to see. Like a lighthouse in a storm, you were always guiding me. Yeah, it's true. You carried me with you. Oh, you carried me with you.
Yeah, great. Thank you for singing with us. We, again, are so glad that you're here with us. You are celebrated. You're affirmed. We love that you're with us today. If you want to take a couple of minutes, introduce yourself to somebody new, have a conversation, it's the introvert's nightmare. That's what we call this section. But we do love for y'all to build community and find friendships. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Hello. Good morning. Good afternoon. I don't know what's happening or what time of day it is because daylight savings time still is confusing. I'm Tiffany, she, they. I'm our director of our kids and students and college and the things. And so at this time, we're going to dismiss kids. So if you are kids, meaning anyone of 5th grade and under, and you want to go, you do not have to go. You can join our volunteers over there. We have snacks, just so you know. Camden is very ready. Students, which is 6th through 12th grade, will be dismissed during the sermon. And so you'll see a little thing on the screen that'll be like students, and you will go that way. So yeah, we're going to go at this time. And that's all mine. Woo!
Woo! Hello, my name is Emily Wire, and I am the Director of Operations here. First of all, if you will scan this QR code, it'll take you to a link tree of everything that I'm about to talk about. Also, can we take a moment and say hi to our online community? If you wave to the ceiling, that will work. Our Salt and Pepper group, which is group for 50-plus-ish, meets today after the 11 a.m. gathering at the Wedge right next door. So you can just walk right through this door, and they'll be there. Dennis and Judy Bentley are collecting winter items for the homeless through the Eyes of Love organization. That's what that box back there that has the snowmans on it is for. They're asking for blankets, winter hats, gloves, coats, jackets, sweatshirts, shoes, boots. Any items can be new or gently used. If you have any of these to spare, please bring please bring them to you. No, please bring them with you to church. That was a lot of prepositions. Next Sunday, that's the last day we're doing collections. The online campus is hosting a meet and greet this Friday, November 17th at 6 p.m. You can join them to get to know that community, and I think they're doing some icebreakers. It's going to be on a Zoom link, which is posted on the website currently. Our holiday party was just announced in the newsletter on Friday, officially. It is December 10th from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock p.m. If you've been to our holidays in the past, you know that we just like to kind of wrap up the year nice and tight because we know that people are going to be traveling. So it's like a good chance for us all to be together, enjoy each other. We're going to have good food, drinks, and pictures with Santa will be from 5:15 to 6:45. So make sure if you do want those pictures, be there in that specific time frame. There will be cookie decorating for kids, so there's something for everyone. We do not have an in-person or online gathering the very last Sunday of this month, which is November 26th. So make sure you mark that in your calendars. We're not doing online because it gives our staff a proper break after Thanksgiving. If you really, really want to watch something that Sunday morning, I'm sure you can find something that you missed this year. It'll be a great opportunity to catch up. Carol Anglin has a very special announcement for us, so prepare yourselves.
Okay. Next Sunday, after the worship service, and I told Adam after you've had a chance to roll up the chords and so forth, we would like to invite anyone who is inclined, who has the time, to come to the Wedge, meet us back at the Wedge, and we're going to have pizza and wings, and Lee Anglin and I are going to host you. Because we want to celebrate our 50th anniversary. Yeah. And we would love to host you back there. And by back there, I mean on the backside of the building. So, that's all I had. Can you believe it? 50 years? Woo.
Grace Point's goal is to create a safe, affirming, and transformative community. To those of you who already financially support us, thank you so much. You can text any dollar amount to 84321. You can go to gracepoint.net/give, scan the QR code, or Venmo us at GracePointTN. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. How's everybody today? Feeling good? Good. Will y'all stand with us? We're going to sing this song together, if you will. In love alone, the world was made, dust and divinity dispersed, the fingertips of God displayed, touching the farthest universe. What eyes could see, what hands could hold, such mystery, such truth untold, no mind could learn, and still we know this is the wonder of God's love. In of life, Spirit of God, in bone and flesh, filling our bodies, hearts, and minds. We're not afraid to trust ourselves. There is no shame, no threat of hell. Our souls find rest, for all is well. This is the glory of God's love. In love alone, we will abound. Justice and mercy is our word. Hands in the dirt, feet to the ground, creating heaven here on earth. We fix our eyes on what is seen. We give our lives to serve the least. Let empires fall, oppression cease. This is the goodness of God's love. We will not place our faith in crowns. We humbly lay our weapons down, for this is where our strength is found. This is the power of God's love. This is the power of God's love. Beautiful. Amen. Thank you. You can be seated.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Thank you, Lee. Nobody else, I don't think anybody else said it. Hi, everybody. It is so good to see you, whether you're here in the room, whether you're joining us online. We're thrilled to have you here today. We're been in a series called Crash Course on Progressive Christianity. Today is just question and response. No answers, just response. I'm really excited. 9 o'clock was incredible. They had so many good questions. Not to make you nervous, but the bar is set pretty high. So really dig deep here today. A couple things before we jump in. Real quick, I'm going to move this cord. There we go. A couple things before we jump in. Next week, I'm going to be out on the final event of the book tour I've been on. It'll be in Lexington, Kentucky, which is a place I've spent a lot of time. So I'm looking forward to being there. I'm going to miss you, but you're going to be in good hands. My dear friend Colby Martin is going to be here of Unclobber book fame. And so you'll get to hear from Colby next week, and I'm so excited for that. Before we jump in, though, I want to just have a moment to just address a avoidable tragedy that's happened in the Nashville community, and that is a Belmont student, Jillian Ludwig, was killed this week by a stray bullet. And it is a tragedy, and it is also a tragedy that could have been avoided had the Tennessee State Legislature grown a little bit of backbone and had a little bit of moral courage. Well, let's be very specific. The Republicans in the Tennessee Legislature. And And so we are continuing in our community and in our country. We are continuing to deal with tragedies that could have been avoided if somebody would just do the right thing. And that is, we need some common sense gun reform in this country, in this state, in the worst possible way. And so we have to keep being really annoying to them. We have to let them know that we're not okay, that this is not how the world should work. This is not how our community should work. People should be able to go for a walk in the park. Are you with me? And it should not be a life-threatening event. So I want to just pause and offer a prayer together today as we just reflect on what's happened, but also reflect on what we long to see in the world. God, we pray specifically today for Jillian's family, for their comfort, that they would know your love, your presence in this time, for the students at Belmont, and for the surrounding community that has one more reason to be afraid to go outside. We also pray for the legislature here in Tennessee and in the entire United States, that we would elect leaders who would develop backbone and moral courage, who would tell the gun lobby that they don't get to decide what's best for this country, what's best for our communities, people who will enact common sense gun reform. We acknowledge that for many of us in the Christian tradition, and for our Jewish siblings, this idea of swords being beaten into plowshares is one of those things that we don't want to take as metaphor, but we long for that to be a reality. Give us wisdom and courage to show up in the world in specific ways that bring about that kind of world, a world of safety, a world free of violence, free of death from violence. We offer this in the name of Jesus, and everybody said, Amen. Amen. So, here's what we did at 9 o'clock. We just pretended that somebody asked the first question already. It was great. It was great. The response was great. You wouldn't believe how great the response was. Just so good. Tell your friends. And so now we're just going to open it up. So we'll start here in the room, and then we'll just alternate back and forth, in person, online, in person, online. So does anybody have a question? And what can they be about? Think about something, anything. That's it. That's what the question can be about. So it can be about the series we've been in. It could be about something we didn't cover. It could be just a random Bible question, theology question, whatever. Just want to hear what's on your mind and what you're thinking about, and I'll offer as helpful a response as possible. So we've already had somebody go first. Who wants to go second? Over here. Thanks, David.
So I think like a lot of us, I grew up in a tradition where when someone asked me to define what it was to be a Christian, I would use words to the effect that I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Part of my evolution has been growing comfortable with the idea that God is the ground of all being. So the question becomes, how, as a progressive Christian, how do I have a personal relationship with the ground of all being?
Well, I'm glad we're starting with something easy. Appreciate the softball, David. Just going to knock this one out of the park, and we'll keep going. I think that so in the experience, I had a very similar experience, right? The whole point was having a personal relationship with Jesus, personal relationship with God. And I think that's a positive thing. I think one of the negatives that came about is that we so invested, we sort of turned the Christian tradition into like a Subway where you can have it your way. And it was all about our own individual experience our own personal relationship, as opposed to realizing our interconnectedness with everything and everyone around us. So that it allowed Christians to be able to say, well, I'm just here for my personal relationship with Jesus, and whatever happens with the rest of y'all is your business, it's not mine. And so I just want to acknowledge that whole idea of a personal relationship can actually veer off track pretty fast, and you could end up with a religion that's all about one person getting the right afterlife experience and the rest of the world suffering and in misery, and we don't have anything to say about it. Does that make sense? So that can go far off track. I think that the very nature of who we are as humans is personal, right? And so I think part of the way we talk about having a relationship with the divine, a relationship with Jesus is personal, is in that while we recognize it's bound up in everybody else too, that there is a piece of this which is about our experience and our journey and our transformation. And I think that ways we do that are different for different people. There are some people that coming to a gathering like this is one of the ways that they have their antennas perked up so that they become more aware of God and the potential for a relationship with the divine. There are other people who do it in sunsets, and there are all sorts of different ways of doing it. So I don't think there's a standard one-size-fits-all. Now, if it had been 20 years ago, I'd have said, well, you got to do your quiet time in the morning, and then you got to do this, this, and this. I just don't think it's that. In some ways, I don't think it's that difficult. In another sense, it's really difficult because so much of how our culture functions is designed around being so fast-paced that you don't have time to think about anything else other than like what's next. And I think paying attention to that relationship with the divine, with Jesus, it is partly about being able to pause long enough to have ourselves opened up. And the other thing I'll say is I think that in my experience, the deeper and more personal my relationship with God or Jesus or whatever language you want to use becomes, the more it draws me to the world and not away from it. The more it draws me to the suffering of the world, to the pain of the world, to the pain in our community. And so I think that the way I was trained was kind of the opposite, that the more I'm focused on Jesus, the more it's just me and Jesus, and the rest of the world gets shut out. But now I think it's the more I'm connected, engaged with Jesus, with the divine, whatever language, the more it opens me up and calls my attention to the rest of the world. And so I think some of the ways we do that is just paying attention, having regular practices like we talked about in the last series that open us up to those sorts of things. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. I think it's about what works for so what works for me may not work for anybody else, and what works for you may not work for anybody else. But I think the goal should be not only to pull us into the personal, but the personal then sends us out to love and care about everyone and everything else too, if that makes sense. Thank you. It's a good question, really hard question in some ways too. Adam, you got something?
Yeah, I have a related question actually from Anne on YouTube. And she's asking, if prayer changes us, how do we make peace with the lack of intercession for others in desperate situations?
That's a great question, too. Another softball. Here's the thing. I do think prayer ultimately is about getting our attention. It's about opening us up, opening our eyes. And I said this at 9 o'clock. I don't personally believe that God intervenes individually, like when you're like, God, I'm at Target, it's the Christmas season, it's busy, I need a parking spot, and God's like, well, I was going to do something about global hunger, but you asked for a parking spot and you're next in line. Or the whole idea about, we need everybody praying. Well, what's the number of people we need praying? I don't think that's how it works. And at the same time, I still do what I guess you would call intercessory prayer. I pray for people. I pray for y'all. I pray for people in my life who I love who are going through hard times. I pray for health. I pray for well-being. I pray that somebody I know will win the lottery. I pray lots of things. Now, I don't necessarily pray those things expecting there to be some sort of bippity-boppity-boo intervention, because I think when we rely on intervention, it creates more problems for God and us than it solves. Like, for example, if you believe that God intervenes in the smallness of needing a parking spot at Target, and you don't believe God intervenes to stop somebody from being tragically harmed, that God is kind of a monster at best, and maybe a sociopath at worst. That God needs to be fired, and somebody else could be hired, right? But I don't think that's how it works. So I still do what we may call intercessory prayer, because Marcus Borg, one of my favorite scholars, would say, I don't believe God intervenes, but I still pray just in case. So, because nobody can tell you, and anybody who says, I can definitively tell you this is how it works, you should probably not listen to that person, because they have way too high an opinion of their ability to know things. But prayer for me, intercessory prayer, is a way of drawing my attention to the people around me and their needs. And if I'm praying for them, then maybe I'll do what Pope Francis said, which is you pray for somebody who's hungry and then you feed them. That's how this works. And so if I'm praying for you for a need, maybe I'll send you a text to check on you, or maybe I'll call you, or maybe I'll send you a DM, or maybe when I see you, I'll reach out to you. And when we do that, it draws our attention to the needs of other people. And I think we are God's intervention in the world. Like, we are the ones who show up in flesh and blood, bearing the image of the divine to share the love and provision of God in the world. And I don't think it's ever going to happen outside of that. I think when God, every time we would say God, quote unquote, shows up, which is really bad language because we live and move and be in God. But if we use that language, God always shows up through us. That has been at least my experience in life. Anytime a need has been met, anytime somebody has brought food or any of those things, it has always been, it was never like one of those weird-looking angels from the Bible. It was always a human being who showed up. So I would say that. I think intercession is really about getting our attention to be the embodiment of God in the world.
Good morning, everyone. So my introduction to the word deconstruction actually started with cooking. So when you think of a deconstructed ice cream sundae, it's taking all the pieces apart and then putting them on the plate, and then you wind up with basically melted cream sprinkle soup with nuts in. And at one point...
And it costs $45.
And it costs $4,500, yes, at a very expensive restaurant. So that's my introduction to that term. And so when I look at deconstructing, I'm thinking, okay, what parts am I taking off the sundae of, Christianity? What, do these sprinkles or these, other things that have been added, what is the core of Christianity? So my question is, with that preface, so deconstructing theology and essentials and non-essentials, at what point, what is the minimum amount of ice cream or goodies that needs to stay intact for it to be considered still Christianity? Is it, the Trinity? Is it Jesus? Is it Jesus, but he could have been human? How do we, when you say this is progressive Christianity, this isn't progressive Christianity, and how much is too much? Or at what point, how do you know that it's still, yes, that's still ice cream. Yes, that's still Christianity.
Yeah, so there would be a lot of people who disagree with me on this. I've had lots of conversations about it on social media this week, because my answer to that is, I don't think there is anybody who can tell you that, because there is no such thing as Christianity. There are Christianities. And so that answer will change depending on who you're talking to. Now, I would say if you really just don't like Jesus and don't find him compelling, I'm not sure why you would want to be a Christian. But really, in my mind, what makes someone a Christian is that they say, hi, I'm Larry, I'm a Christian. Insert your name there. It's not Larry. It's calling yourself Larry is what, in fact, makes you one. So I think in some ways it is. There's nobody who can tell you that. There's nobody who can tell you, contrary to what they believe, when they show up in your Facebook feed or whatever, you're on Twitter or whatever it's called now, and they say to you, well, you're not a Christian. I just love being able to go, yeah, actually I am because I say so. And you don't get to define other people. You don't get to tell them who they are. I'm Christian because I claim to be Christian, and for me that means I am compelled by the life and teachings of Jesus, and I love Jesus. But for other people, that would be very different. So I don't think there is this thing, this bullseye called Christianity that we're all trying to hit, because it looks different this is why we have 40,000 denominations, is because nobody can sit down and agree on what the Bible is, who Jesus is, how the death of Jesus worked, if it worked at all, what happened on Easter. We don't agree on those things. And we don't agree on things as simple as, in the world I came out of, can you or can you not lose your salvation like a set of car keys? There's not agreement there. So I think it really comes down to people who decide whether or not the Christian path is what they feel drawn to and who they are, and then they become and do and be Christian in the ways they feel called, drawn, instructed to do and be Christian. So there's no answer to that other than it's up to us to decide who we are and how Christian we are, Yes?
Yeah, I have a question from James on YouTube saying the term self-care has many meanings. What does this mean for those of us who are recovering from spiritual trauma?
Another softball. So here's what I would say to that. I think self-care and recovery from spiritual trauma means you do what you need to do to be okay without guilt. So if that means, and this is something I've said a lot, if coming to church is harmful for you, then it's okay to take a break, however long that break is for you. If it's forever, if it's for a week. I remember being in a session with Marcus Borg the one time I got to hear him speak in person before he passed. And he was talking about something and at the beginning of his talk, and he just said, if you're going to a church right now and it makes you miserable, go to a different church. Life's too short to be miserable. And I would say the same thing. If you need to take a break for your well-being, the impulse among a lot of church leadership, a lot of pastors would be to say, no, we're different. And I believe at Grace Point we are different. But I also understand that trauma can run so deep for people, and it can be so part of the system, like just the experience of church can be triggering. And so I would say self-care means taking care of yourself, doing what you need to do to have your well-being prioritized and cared for, because then it's that whole airplane oxygen mask situation that you put the oxygen mask on you and then you're able to help other people. So I would say do what you need to do for your own well-being. That's what self-care looks like even in the realm of spiritual trauma.
Hey, Josh.
We got one right here, then we'll go there.
Got a question for you. Growing up traditionally, God was spoken of something that was identifiable. God was He, God the Father. God had a heart and a mind that we could seek. God was pretty specific. Mm-hmm. In progressive Christianity, is that the God that you speak of, or is God more of a broader force that we put a face on so we have somewhere to aim our thoughts and prayers? Or is God just a notion that we have to include everything we don't know? So I guess in short, what is God? And can you give 3 examples?
So when I said the 9 o'clock really brought it, you all, you heard that, and you were like, hold my beer, and now here we are. One of the things I say a lot is whatever the word God means, because I think there should be a lot of humility when we're talking about unknowable things. Now, I'm not saying that, if you have a belief in God, you probably have a belief in God for reasons, right? Maybe you've had experiences, and those are valid and meaningful. One of the interesting things to watch in the Scripture, and when we talk about God in the Bible, God is a character in the Bible, right? It's human beings talking about God through the lens of their experience and their understanding and their hopes, but we don't have like this independent, objective God. And that's why we see God change a lot in the Bible, right? You'll see God act differently in different circumstances. One of the interesting changes, and I'm just going to go here because this is something I've wanted to talk about for a while, and Brian just gave me kind of an invitation, and then I'll get to the overall question. For example, if you want to see the change in how the ancient Israelites and Judahites thought about God, go to the first 2 chapters of the Bible, Genesis 1 and 2. If you go to Genesis chapter 2, you find what is kind of the older story, which is God creates things, and then God has hands, and God like scoops the dirt up and forms, and God has a mouth, and God breathes into the human being the breath, and then God shows up to walk in the garden. It's very like God is like us, right? God has a body, God has hands, God has a heart, God has a mind. If you go to Genesis 1, which is the newer story, what do you find there? You find God who has none of those. God is sort of just spirit, voice, and God speaks things into creation. What you see there, and it's in the wrong order chronologically, but what you see there is a shift in understanding of God. The ancient Israelites, ancient Jewish folks, went through a transition from believing God was sort of like a human, just cooler, with more powers, and the experience of exile, when you lose everything, and you lose your temple, and you lose your land, and in all of your experience, your understanding of God was tied to this spot. In the ancient world, people believed that the deities were tied to territories. What do you do when you are taken and uprooted from your place, and you're taken over here where another God rules? This is why you write things like, by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept. On the poplars we hung our harps when they asked us to sing the songs of Zion. How do we sing God's songs in a foreign land? They're not asking that rhetorically. How in the world do we see songs for our God who just got defeated by Babylon and is all the way back there? And you see this innovation in thought about God. maybe, just maybe, God isn't a person like us who's tied to a spot. Maybe, just maybe, God is sort of this spirit, this universal presence that can go with us anywhere. The beginning, how many of you read the beginning of the book of Ezekiel? And they're trying to figure out if it's talking about aliens, right? Because God's on this throne, and it's got all these eyes, and there's all these wheels, and all this stuff happening. Simplify that. Ezekiel is telling a story of how this God locked in one particular place becomes mobile to meet the Israelites in exile. That's what's going on in Ezekiel. So it's the shift in God. I think we are currently undergoing and we have since then, but we're currently going through shifts in, for many of us, our understanding of what the word God means. Are we talking about an objective reality? Are we talking about a metaphor? Are we talking about, that's a pretty wide spectrum, and there's all sorts of things in between. How personal is this? How does this divine being interact with us? And all of those are really important questions that nobody can give you the objective answer to. I'll say that when I talk about the divine, when I talk about God, I'm fully comfortable with people using God as a metaphor for whatever the reality is that I believe is inviting us, calling us, pulling us forward. That's saying, this could be better. More love, more inclusion, more justice, more equity, more goodness in the world. I think there is a reality calling us to that. That's inviting us, not coercing us, not forcing us, but saying to us, look, this is the trajectory. You could go here. I think there's something. And we use the word God as sort of a catch-all for that something. The problem is the word God and the concepts we've been given, I don't think are anywhere near big enough to begin to contain that reality that we're trying to talk about. So I would answer the question, Brian, yes, no, maybe. All of the above, I guess, all of the above. Because I think the word God, we can only speak about God through metaphor. That's what St. Thomas Aquinas said. Every time we speak about God, we have to employ a metaphor because whatever God is so outside of the ability of human language. And isn't it ridiculous that we've thought for generations that our feeble attempts at language could actually describe and contain whatever God is? That, we've got the perfect set definition. I think our experience of God and our definition of God will continue to evolve because we are. And as we grow and as we learn, we change our minds, we come up with better formulations, better understandings, and my assumption is that as long as people exist, in like 5 billion years the sun's gonna explode, don't panic, it won't affect you. But someday, this whole project may be over, and then I have all sorts of questions about that, but the reality is as long as humans are growing and changing and evolving, our understanding of the universe, of the cosmos, of the material and the immaterial are going to change. And I'll just say something I've said the last several weeks. Here's what I don't think. I don't think wherever we're wrong about God, it is not because we went too far. It is because we have not yet gone far enough into what goodness, love, mercy, compassion, all of that actually looks like. Yeah.
I've got another question from YouTube.
Okay.
Dustin is asking, when you finally ask the question why and start the deconstruction process, what is the best resource to use to help that process?
Oh, that's great. I mean, for me, the way my process started is I had some stuff happen when I was just before I was a teenager that sort of cracked my worldview. If we all live under this, like I grew up under a sacred canopy of assumptions about God, and this is how everything works. And so when I was 12, that began to crack and splinter. It was when I finally hit my 20s, and somebody gave me a copy of a DVD. If you don't know what those are, they're these little discs that play movies, not to be confused with a laser disc, but a disc that plays movies. And it was a DVD called Enuma. It was by a guy named Rob Bell. And Rob was talking about the Bible and history, and it just, like those fissures were already there, and it just caused it to split apart more. And through Rob's work, I found Brian McLaren and Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan, and all these years later now, there are folks like Pete Enns who's doing some really important work. And so I think it's finding, for me, when I started the deconstruction journey, there weren't a lot of people publicly talking about it or doing it. Like it wasn't even called deconstructing. I just called it, That was my technical name for the experience. And so the benefit we have today is that there are more people talking about this. There are more resources that are being written specifically to help people through the process. And so for me, I had to be pastored through it by books or by catching people who were meaningful to me at an event, which meant driving God knows where to listen to an hour lecture just because I needed some sort of contact with other human beings. So, I think books are a great way to do that. I think that there are podcasts that are doing a really good job of being helpful. And there are all these groups like on Facebook for people who are in the process of deconstructing to find resources. So it depends on how you best learn and how you best feel seen and how you best process. The good news is right now there are resource after resource that are being produced that can help people. And if the only thing they can do, because this was a big deal for me, anytime early on I would meet somebody who was also asking similar questions, when they would sort of whisper quietly so nobody heard them because all of our jobs were on the line, they would say, yeah, me too. Just feeling seen and known there are other people going through this was such an unbelievable gift to me at the time. So, there are great resources. And then, if you're on social media, you'll see people talk. It is at least in my feed, this is what people are talking about all the time. Is what happens when your faith no longer works in the way it used to work, and what do you do with it? So it's a really good time to be experiencing this, actually, because there are so many resources available. Do I have? Yep.
I have a question asking for practical wisdom based on a real-life situation. I find myself in this situation from time to time. So 2 days ago, I'm walking around my neighborhood with my dog, and one of my neighbors, his old dog is in his front yard without a leash and comes up to my dog, and we greet and meet dogs and owners. And he asked me where I'm from. He was super friendly, older guy, and then finds out I'm from the same place where his wife's from. He invites me in his house, very welcoming and gracious to me. And then as we come outside and I continue my walk, I'm standing outside his garage, which is his man cave, and I'm looking at the sign on the flag on the back of his garage, which says FUCKBIDEN. Did you hear that second part?
I did, yes.
Yeah. And then he says, I'm not political, but
I'm not political, but that guy.
I'm not political, but damn socialists are ruining this nation. Okay. Uh-oh. And I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And again, from time to time, find myself in this very conflicted situation because part of me wants to connect with him, and part of me doesn't.
Yeah, I get that.
Is it worth? And should I walk down that street? I mean, I'm not afraid to walk down the street, but part of me wants to move towards him and maybe even have a certain conversation.
Yeah.
And part of me feels like, to have a connection with him, I have to avoid topics. But then, am I being an unfaithful ally of the things that I believe in?
Oh, yeah. This is why I think that evolutionarily speaking, fainting goats have something on us. Because they could just pass out and get out of any conversation they don't want to have. So if you could just be on poof, and they're like, oh, it's over. But we don't get to do that. So look, there are two sides to this two responses to this question, and I think both are right depending on the experience. First of all, it is not everyone's job to be the person to show up and be able to help lead some other person down a path. So for example, I don't believe it's the job of any of the LGBTQ plus community to talk to people who are really hostile and have bad theologies. I think, if they feel safe and want to, that's a whole other discussion. But I think that there are people who can do that's their calling differently. So I think that there's a chance when somebody doesn't feel safe because they see that. Because when you see that, that's not just a political statement, like, I don't like this one particular person. This is a statement against all the things that get associated with essentially Democrats. right, which is more progressive. I think you can make an argument sometimes nowhere near progressive enough. Policies and those sort of things that real human lives are bound up in. So for some people, the right situation would be is to try to get out of there and never go back. And to try to be as cordial as you can if you bump into the person, but it's not your mission or your job to go in and change that. For other people, there is that sense of if we're ever going to change hearts and minds around a lot of the bigotry and bias in this country, somebody's got to be willing to sit down and talk to people who have this particular perspective and to be able to speak to it calmly, kindly, compassionately, but also with a bit of firmness and strength when it needs to be. So I think it depends on each individual person. And so if you didn't feel unsafe, if you didn't feel like, if you feel like, hey, this is actually kind of my responsibility to sit down with this person, it's sort of like, when you used to try to make friends with people so you could evangelize them? It's sort of like that, but without trying to convert them to your religion, but to convert them away from a negative, hostile way of showing up to their neighbors. Because I just can't believe, I'll be honest with you, just cards on the table. I was at a place the other day and somebody came in, it was a woman, and she was wearing a Women for Trump shirt, which I had all sorts of questions about. And I just remember thinking, I bet she does not, either she was aware of how this is making some people feel around her, and she just doesn't care, or it has not yet entered her mind what it might feel like for people to see that shirt and have very visceral, fear-triggered responses to it because of what it represents. Now, I don't know this woman. I was just getting an allergy shot. I wasn't there to throw down. So I just kept that one to myself. But I do wonder, is that sign and bringing it to you, is it a way of sort of, do you agree? And if so, can we get together and vent about this? Or, and so I'm interested. I'm actually, I'll often engage people even online about these sorts of things just because I have a curiosity about where it goes. And I also feel like if I'm not willing, as a person of immense privilege, if I'm not willing to sit down and talk to people about these things that really matter and real human lives are on the line about, then who will? And so I do see it kind of as my responsibility, especially because a lot of the people who have those signs in their house occupy a very similar position that I do in the world, a position of privilege and power. And so if I'm not willing to sit down and be able to offer my perspective, listen to them, of course, but also be able to offer my perspective and any wisdom I might have on that. So, I think it depends. It's a case by case. Do you feel like this is safe? Is it going to harm you? Or does it feel a little bit like, hey, this might be my responsibility to help talk to this person because they're going to say some probably really horrible things. And I want to be able to push back on that and maybe invite them to think about how their posture. If I had the time and I'd sat down with that woman, I wanted to know, how do you feel, or do you think about how other people feel when you show up in that shirt? And do you think that maybe you have a responsibility to think about there's this religion guy named Jesus who says, love your neighbor, right? And everybody's your neighbor. Is that really loving our neighbor when we know that this thing is so viscerally powerful and triggering? Does that make sense?
I've got a question from Randy on YouTube asking, how do you still believe in God when you haven't seen them answer any prayers or do any miracles when you see it happening all the time in the Bible?
That's a great question. I don't take a lot of those things literal in the Bible, so that doesn't help me. I think people believe in God or don't believe in God for really good reasons. The reason there's a little tinge of mysticism to my spirituality is purely because of experiences I've had that have led me to be like, I know that I don't believe what I was taught. What I often tell people about me is, the category of theist doesn't describe me. I am not a theist. I'm also not an atheist. Because neither one of those, like supernatural theism and just I almost said stone cold atheism. Atheism 316. Just kind of like materialist atheism. Neither one of those fully explain my experience of the world. Because, I don't believe, like I said earlier, about that God bippity boppity boos the stuff. But I do think that there is something, at the core of the experience of reality, there is something. Some people maybe would say it's some sort of evolutionary process. Some people would use the word God. But there is a reality that I personally think I've experienced in some way that is inviting us to move forward. And so that's why I choose to still, I don't know if there's a good language, a good title for the thing I am. I kind of hope there isn't. Because I think when we use like atheist and theist, it just so boils it down to like, it seems like there are these two polar positions. But if you talk to people in those, that stream, that spectrum, you'll find a lot of different perspectives, just like you do if you talk to Christians or Jews or Muslims or whatever. And so that's why. And there are really good reasons to read all that, to experience all that, and just say, I don't think that this idea of God makes the most sense of it. And people reach that for lots of really, really important reasons. I just still personally, based on experience and based on my own being in this body, in this world, that's where I wind up. Can we give Taylor a hand? My gosh. Just doing a fantastic job.
So we are both Belmont students, so I really appreciate you addressing that in the beginning. And so I think, as a lot of us have experienced in really tragic times, it brings out a lot of ugliness in some people, and that's been our experience in the Belmont community. Is they are making it a race thing, they're making it a public housing thing, and they're labeling that with, I believe all of this because I'm Christian. And so it's really difficult sometimes to try and have those conversations, not only with the people that are saying these things, but also the people that feel really unsafe and by those things that they're so boldly saying. So how do, I guess just the advice or the language of, yeah, I'm Christian, but that's why I don't believe all those things that other groups are saying about labeling I'm Christian.
Yeah. Well, so we were at my wife had a friend turn 40 yesterday, and we went to his birthday party, and we're sitting down at a table with some people, with a couple people we didn't know, and we made enough small talk that one of them looked at us, and they knew what Carla did, that had already come up, and she asked me, "What do you do?" And I was trying, that moment when the Grinch gets caught trying to shove the tree up the chimney? And he's going, what do I tell them? How do I not make this weird? And so I told him what I did, and I think it made it a little weird for a minute. I'm not sure. So I get that. Like, at 9 o'clock, I said something like, sometimes it's not that I'm not proud to be, I'm grateful. I love my religious tradition, but also there's so much baggage, and that if you were to just write the word Christianity on a board and put a pin in it and start taking yarn and attaching it to all the problems in the world and our society, you can trace a lot of them back to the way we've been Christian and the kinds of ways, because there's not just one way, but the ways we've been Christian. And so, what I try to do when I have the actual opportunity to talk to somebody is to just acknowledge there are lots and lots of ways to be Christian. Because, again, we don't get to decide who is and who isn't. But my understanding and the way I'm trying to be Christian is really different than that. And the way I'm trying to be Christian is influenced by my understanding of Jesus' message, which calls us to love our neighbor, to love our enemy, to care about the kind of presence we are in the world. And I think there are ways to do that without it feeling that are just natural and conversational. Right, which is, and I think sometimes it's important to draw distinctions because, again, the word Christian can mean so many different things. I think sometimes it's important to say, here's how our approach to the Christian tradition differs. One of the things people sometimes will say to me is like, why do you critique Christianity so much? Like you're one of them. And my general response is, that's why. Because I'm one of them. It's my tradition. It's my mess too. And then they'll say something like, well, you don't critique Islam that way, or you don't critique Buddhism that way. And I'm like, yeah, that's because I'm trying to follow the teaching. This is a great Jesus juke. That's why I'm trying to follow the teaching of Jesus, which tells me to take the 2x4 out of my eye before I go and get the speck of dust out of someone else's. And there is way too much 2x4 sticking out of the eye of Christianity in the United States of America in our day, and I need to be spending my time getting that beam out of our eye and allow people in those other traditions to deal with their specks. That's not my job. I'm a Christian. I am not, in my critique of Christianity, I'm not coming as an enemy. I'm coming as a friend who loves this. I'm a son of this tradition and will be until I die. They won't kick me out because they can't. And yet I also want to acknowledge what we've done in the world. And so I think finding ways to do that, just to acknowledge, yeah, those are Christian people and they're saying those kind of things. And it breaks my heart because my understanding of being Christian looks really different. And Richard Rohr has this great line I'm going to butcher where he says something like, the best critique of the poor is the practice of the better. And I think one of the best ways to counter bad, toxic religion and bad, toxic interpretations is to show up and embody a better way, a more human, a more kind, a more generous and just way, if that makes sense. Thank you.
I just want to reference, Joe had a very similar question online, and I hope that answered it for you. We're not skipping your question. I just feel like it's been answered. The next question would be from Sierra asking, why was Jesus' sexuality never addressed, and why didn't he get married? And is it important to our context?
Yeah. So one, why didn't Jesus get married? I mean, we don't know that he wasn't. Seems unlikely, simply just because of his teaching. And Jesus and Paul both had, Paul's teaching was a little different. Paul said, whatever state you're in right now, don't change it. So if you're married, be married. If you're not married, don't be married. Jesus' teaching was that there are people who are not going to get married in order to pursue this kingdom of God thing. Now, the reason they were saying that is not because being in a relationship like that is inherently somehow anti-kingdom. But Jesus and Paul both believed the end of the age was coming soon. And so, they believed it so much that they were putting all their eggs in that basket. The end of the age is coming, which means we have work to do, and we don't have time to be doing, like there's no time to go on a honeymoon because the end is coming. Now, what most people think is, like, weren't they silly, they got it wrong. I actually think they got it right. The end of the age came in the year 70, when the Romans came in and destroyed life as they knew it. The end of the age, and that seems to be how Jesus and Paul both thought about it. The end of the age is coming, and this could go either way. If you read the Gospel of Mark, I think part of what Mark is saying is if we had listened to Jesus, we would not be digging out of the rubble of this city. We would be living we would not have violently rebelled against Rome. We would have done it the Jesus way, which is to build communities to undermine the empire, right? Which is way different, subversive, sort of underground stuff, not violence. And so I think that's what's going on with why Jesus seems to not have gotten married, why Paul seems to not have gotten married, is because they were living at the end. And every time somebody here in our time says, hey, the end is coming, people like go to the desert and hang out with and don't shower. I don't know. But like it's that whole like leave it all behind, the end is coming. I think they had that view. I think the reason they don't talk about sexuality of Jesus is because they don't really talk about the sexuality of anyone, because in the ancient world, and this is why one of the arguments against the LGBTQ plus community makes no sense, is because in the ancient world, they could not have fathomed sexual identity in the way we understand and talk about sexual identity. Now, it doesn't mean that there weren't people who were LGBTQ plus in the ancient world. There were. They did not have the language or categories through which to engage and seek to explain it. So for them, it would have been just as weird for them to have talked about the sexuality of Jesus as it would have been for them to try to describe what the color blue tastes like, because it just wasn't something, it just wasn't a category for them in the ancient world. It is, as humans, this is the strangest thing. As we evolve and grow, we learn new things. And the problem is we are living with religious traditions that, not because of the people who started them, but because of those of us who've come alongside them and tried to literalize them and freeze them in time, we've created real problems for human growth and development. I remember hearing Brian McLaren talk once about I think his dad was a doctor, and he talks about going and getting, not too long ago, before I heard this talk, whenever it was, he went and got one of his dad's medical books and pulled it down, and one of the things was, it was advice that a pregnant woman should smoke a few cigarettes a day for the health of the baby. Now, there was a period of time when they were just building the plane as they flew it, right? But now we know that it's not a good idea to smoke when you're pregnant. That's actually detrimental. Can you imagine if somebody came along and said, but right here, in the 1972 book about medicine, it says, and if it says it in this book, we should do it. Isn't that kind of bizarre? Can you imagine somebody come along 2,000 years after a text was written and say, well, this says women shouldn't talk in the meeting? Can you imagine by going, and it's still valid today with all we know and all we've learned? I mean, so this is why for me, arguments from the Bible, I understand why it's important. And next week, Colby's going to be here, and I don't think he's talking about that, but Colby wrote a great book, Unclobber, that deals with those passages in Scripture that have been used and abused and weaponized to harm LGBTQ plus folks. For me, I don't need the Bible to condone something to say that it's good. Because I love this line from Paul where he says, I too have the Spirit of God. I trust that the Spirit can lead us into wisdom. Jesus actually said as much, the Spirit will guide you into truth. There are things I need to tell you now, but you can't bear them yet. And the church has been not bearing them for 2,000 years when Jesus is right in front of us saying, no, now you need to listen to this truth. So it's not that God suddenly one day became affirming, for example. It's that we have been playing catch up with God as long as we've been a species and walking upright. So it's just not a category that they would have had in the ancient world.
So in a lot of churches, their goal is eternity in heaven. Like, that's what the point is. And in progressive Christianity, that's not the point. Where does eternity in heaven fit in progressive Christianity?
Question about the afterlife. What day is it? My opinion changes based on the day. Because this is one of those unknowable things, right? I don't know. I think that what we have read into the Scripture, when we've read in eternal life, we've read in kingdom of heaven, kingdom of God, we've read that language to be about the afterlife, and it's just not. It's talking about very concrete, real world sorts of things. Do I believe as a progressive Christian? I think about this stuff a lot. Do I think there's an afterlife? Is there heaven? Is there eternity? I just don't know. I hope. I kind of like to think so. Sometimes I'm like, do we really want to keep doing this forever and ever? It's one big worship service. Is that what we're shooting for? But here's what I will say. And the one thing that gives me a little bit of we must continue in some way is actually not faith, it's science. And that is this Newtonian idea that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. I got that right, didn't I? That's it. We are walking bundles of energy. And if energy can't be created nor destroyed, then that leads me to believe that somehow, some way, in some sense, the energy that is us keeps energying somewhere else, somehow else. I don't know how that exactly works. But I think that maybe somehow that's what happens. I think that for progressive Christianity, the way I understand it, again, this is all Josh's version. I think when I think about eternity, what I'm thinking about is, let's just say this planet keeps going for a long time. Several billion years sounds like an eternity to me. How are we showing up in the world, and what are we doing in the world that will enable future generations to flourish and to pick up the baton and keep doing the work of carrying this forward? Carrying forward a better, and I'm not even talking about religion here, and I'm not talking about being Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist. I'm talking about being human, a better way of being human. My thought is a really good religion shouldn't just help people become really good, insert religion name here. Like Christianity, if it's got something to it, it shouldn't just help us become good Christians. It should help us become good humans that work for the flourishing of all humans in the world. And when I think of eternity, I think, what are we leaving and how are we teaching the next generation to approach this so that we are continually trying to better the planet for the people who come after us? Because I think that's the sacred work we've been given. Okay, we're running out of time. Let's do one more.
So my question is, you touched on something earlier when you talked about your deconstruction beginning at a frustration with like the cafeteria Christianity, Subway, have it your way. And that's what made me leave. But what I ran from was Protestantism, not religion altogether. And so I found myself in liturgical Christianity, which felt very comfortable because there was nothing but rules. And so I knew absolutely everything in its absolute form. And I abhorred the mad monk who started Protestantism because he ruined this beautiful thing, was what caused me to convert. Joke's on me. And so now I'm on the other side of it, and what I struggle with is people throw what you said at me a lot when I'm discussing deconstruction and when I'm discussing my faith, and they go, you're just picking and choosing.
Yeah.
And so for you, how have you gotten past that accusation? Because I think when you said you abhorred that, I agree, and I think that you do. But then also, how do we answer the question of we're not picking and choosing?
Yeah, so what I kind of abhor is this sense of the only thing that matters is our own personal experience at the expense of everyone else. I think that it's a very Western thing, right, for our faith to be just about us. When people say you're just picking and choosing, here's what I say. Yeah, you're right. We are just picking. Everybody's picking and choosing. Because ultimately, faith, what we believe, how we interpret the Bible, all that says way more about us than it does about God. It says about, like, this is what we're comfortable with a God who sometimes, who loves us, but sometimes it's like, maybe genocide's not a bad deal. Right? That's a problem for me. That version of God is a problem for me. And so I think we have to just be honest. Like, there are parts of the Bible and parts of my faith tradition that I outright just reject because it's not good for the world. There are some that I reimagine, reframe, and reclaim. I think where I push back is by saying we all are picking and choosing. It's not just me. It's not just progressive Christians. It's also conservative Christians. I mean, there's a reason why they'll quote one verse from Leviticus but not quote the one about eating pork. It's because the one about eating pork would mess up their deal. And they're more interested in keeping one group of people out of the church, but also keeping bacon available at the potluck, which is a little disingenuous. I'm trying to avoid being disingenuous by just saying, yeah, there are some things. When I turn to the pastoral epistles and I see somebody writing in Paul's name saying women should be quiet, disagree. We're going to ignore that. We're going to acknowledge that it's in there, but it's not a gotcha because we disagree. I think it's okay to go to the Bible, read something, and go, yeah, I see that differently now. Even stuff Paul wrote. I'll never forget being in a small group once, years and years and years ago, and somebody saying something, well, but Paul says this. And I was like, yeah, I just disagree with that. They're like, you disagree with Paul? And I'm like, well, I think I too have the Spirit of God. So just using Paul's words there. But yeah, so I think it's just to acknowledge. Now, I hope I'm picking and choosing the parts of my tradition that help me become a better, more compassionate human, which will lead to me doing better, more compassionate things in the world. It's not about picking and choosing. It's about what we're picking and choosing and how that shapes and forms us and what it says about the kind of people we're becoming. So I definitely encourage picking and choosing. Let's just do it in a way that leads to human flourishing and that leads away from Christian supremacy and leads away from bad theology that tells us that the whole point is about getting out of here and going somewhere else, when the real point is about rolling up our sleeves, like we sang about earlier, and joining God in the muck and mire of this world and doing good things in this world. Does that make sense? All right. Hey, thank you. Can you give yourselves a hand? You were great. Yeah. I'm going to invite the band to come on back up. Have y'all enjoyed this series, doing the question response each week and all that? Good deal. If you have questions that continue, and I prayed at the end we made a joke about praying as a transition between speaking and singing. Like, we pray so that nobody sees the band come up here, because we want people to think they have magic abilities. Like, you close your eyes, they're not there, you open them back up, it's like, where did they come from? Did they come from the floor? So I'm not going to pray right now because the end of this didn't lend itself to me doing that. At 9 o'clock it did. Let's normalize doing what's like non-manipulative and what makes sense. Are you with me? Yeah. So thanks, guys.
Are shattered, and you feel like your soul is at sea. Your dreams don't seem to matter. Your heart is bruised and battered. You can't feel anything. Love anyway. Gone to hell, no story left to tell. Love anyway. I've been
children, an owner of a heart that's slow to change. Love anyway. Love anyway. When the world has gone to hell, no story left to tell. Love anyway. Broken promises, truth and consequence, pride and tenderness, all those failed attempts, joy and happiness, joy and happiness, joy and happiness. Love anyway. Love When your world has gone to hell, no story left to tell. Love anyway. When your world has gone to hell, no story left to tell. Love anyway. Thank you so much, Grace Point. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for this time. We hope you had a good service, and we will see you back here next week. Have a good one.